YNW Melly back in court today. His attorney saying the state has not given enough evidence to this point to keep him in jail. But prosecutors say they have proven plenty that shows he needs to remain behind bars.
YNW Melly just scored a major win in the appellate court. The 4th District Court of Appeal officially sided with Judge Murphy's earlier decision to limit what evidence could be used from the warrants, and that's exactly why this whole trial's been delayed for so long. If you forgot, Judge Murphy decided to narrow the time range for Melly's Snapchat, Gmail, Facebook, Instagram, and iCloud data, and the state wasn't happy about it, so they tried to fight it. But now the higher court has spoken and completely backed up the judge's call. This is a big deal. I'm going to break down what that means and why it could change the entire case. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. All right, so here's what happened. The state of Florida filed an appeal after Judge Murphy suppressed parts of the evidence in both Melly's double murder case and a related witness tampering case. The judge ruled that some of the search warrants were too broad, basically giving access to way too much data. These warrants covered entire accounts from start to finish, like every single piece of info from one of Melly's phones. Judge Murphy said that was too much, so he decided to limit the search only to the time around the day of the murders. That means for things like Gmail, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and iCloud, investigators could only look at a narrow window instead of years of private messages. Now, when the state appealed, they didn't even try to argue that the warrants were fair. Instead, they said, "We would have found this stuff anyway." But Melly's team fired back, saying Florida law doesn't allow you to use evidence from an overly broad warrant, even if you think you would have found it later. This ruling is massive, and it shows the court isn't letting prosecutors go beyond what's fair. So Melly's legal team went all in. They wanted everything from those warrants completely thrown out. They argued that since the searches were too broad, none of that evidence should be used at all. But the appellate court said nope. They agreed with Judge Murphy's original call instead. The court said the trial judge was right to reject the state's main witnesses' claims, calling them nothing more than speculation. Basically, they said the state didn't have solid proof to back up what they were trying to argue. Now, the judges wrote that their main focus was to explain why they didn't buy Melly's side's argument to throw out everything. Melly's lawyers said that if part of a warrant is invalid, the whole thing should be tossed. But the court made it clear that's not how it works. They said a warrant doesn't automatically become worthless just because parts of it were too broad. Florida courts, and even some federal courts, have agreed that you can still keep valid parts of a warrant as long as they follow the law. So in simple terms, the court can cut out the bad parts and keep what's fair. Judge Murphy even mentioned that he had to look at federal cases for guidance because there wasn't much direction under Florida law about how to split a warrant properly. So he followed a federal step-by-step approach, narrowing down the search to only what was necessary and legal. The court also reminded everyone that severing a warrant isn't easy, especially when parts of it don't have probable cause. But the bottom line, the judges stood by Murphy's decision, keeping Melly's win intact. The order also pointed out that federal courts can narrow or sever a warrant if the only issue is that it covered too much time. Basically, if it didn't have a clear time limit. In that case, the court can just remove the unnecessary time frame and keep the valid parts of the warrant that follow the law. That's exactly what Judge Murphy did. He looked at federal cases that dealt with this same issue, especially one from the Second Circuit known as Galpin. That case showed how judges could trim down a warrant to make it fair without throwing out all the evidence. The appellate court said Judge Murphy made the right move by following that same logic and narrowing the time frame instead of canceling everything. The Galpin case is used as an example because it explains how to balance things out. It says courts should only keep the parts of a warrant that are specific and legally sound. But if a warrant is so broad that no part of it is properly defined, then yeah, you can't fix it. The whole thing would be invalid. Now, in Melly's situation, the trial court used Galpin's method to check each warrant one by one. And one key example was the iCloud account linked to Melly's iPhone X. That's where the judge decided the original search went way too far. And so he cut it down to focus only on what happened close to the time of the incident. So in short, this federal approach gave Judge Murphy a solid legal path to follow, and the higher court fully agreed with how he handled it. The affidavit supporting the warrant was supposed to track YNW Melly's location around the time of the incident, and that small detail turned out to be a huge deal. The problem? Neither the affidavit nor the actual warrant included any kind of time limit. That meant investigators ended up getting access to Melly's entire iCloud account, basically everything from the very beginning. That's wild, right? Judge Murphy saw that and said, hold on, that's way too broad. So he decided to narrow it down. He limited the warrant to cover only the time of the shooting and just a few hours before and after it happened. He explained that the whole point of the warrant was to figure out where Melly was during and shortly after the incident, not to dig through years of unrelated info. The judge also pointed out that police had reason to believe the people inside the car were using their phones right when the shooting went down. Apparently, Melly even called his mother shortly after it happened, something that had been mentioned in earlier reports. The phone's data showed activity connecting to nearby cell towers, proving the phone was in use around that time, but investigators couldn't tell exactly which apps or messages were being used. Based on that, the trial court focused only on the key hours surrounding the event and identified 5 main categories of evidence that could be reviewed. Everything else from the warrant was suppressed. Judge Murphy's decision kept the focus on what really mattered, tracking Melly's location during that critical window and protecting his digital privacy from being overexposed. So the whole purpose of those warrants was to link Melly to the crimes. But here's where it gets interesting. The court said that the best way to handle digital search warrants, especially for things like cloud accounts, is to keep them time-based. That means narrowing them down to a specific window instead of collecting years of personal data. This came straight from a 2023 case called United States versus McGall. The judges reviewed everything and agreed that Judge Murphy did not make a mistake by narrowing the warrants. They officially affirmed his decision, meaning Melly's win stands strong. And this right here explains why Melly's trial has been delayed for so long. The state didn't like the judge's ruling and appealed it, hoping the higher court would let them use the full range of evidence. But deep down, they had to know this was a long shot. Many believe it was just a tactic to slow things down, especially after the first prosecutor was removed from the case. This whole appeal dragged on for almost 2 years, and now it's officially denied. The court made it clear Judge Murphy was right to limit what could be used. That means certain pieces of digital evidence are out, and that's a serious shift heading into the next trial. Now that the appeal's been denied, things are about to move fast in this case. The prosecution can't rely on that broad digital evidence anymore, so they'll have to rebuild their arguments using only what the court allowed. And that's a much smaller window to work with. This puts real pressure on the state because their timeline just got tighter, and a lot of what they hope to show is now off limits. Meanwhile, Melly's defense team is celebrating. They've been saying from the start that these warrants were unfairly invasive, that investigators were digging way too deep into his private data. And now, the higher court has basically confirmed that. This gives the defense a stronger foundation going into the next phase, and they're gonna make sure the jury knows this wasn't a small win, it was a major one. But don't get it twisted. This doesn't mean Melly's walking free yet. The state still has some evidence that survived the cut, and they'll try to use every bit of it in court. What makes this more intense is how much the first trial already exposed. Witness testimony, text messages, and inconsistencies that left the jury split. So now every new hearing matters even more. The next move, the state's going to regroup and prepare for a retrial, but they'll be working with fewer tools than before. And Melly's team, they're going to argue that the prosecution's case just got weaker, way weaker. Reports say Judge Murphy is ready to get this case back on track as soon as possible. Remember, this appeal froze everything for almost 2 years. That's 2 years of delay, 2 years of buildup, and 2 years of public speculation. Fans and critics have been watching every move, and now everyone's asking, when is the new trial date? What's clear is that this decision completely changes the strategy. The defense will likely focus on what's missing, all the data that got thrown out, and use that to argue that the state can't fully prove its case anymore. Without full access to Melly's digital accounts, it'll be harder for prosecutors to trace his movements or communication patterns in detail. The state, on the other hand, might double down on witness statements, forensic evidence, and whatever phone data they do have, but they're walking a thin line because one wrong move or unverified claim could get challenged right away. And in the middle of all this, Melly's fans are online going crazy. Some say this is a sign he's coming home soon. Others say the state's gonna push even harder. But one thing's certain, this new ruling just flipped the energy in the courtroom. Behind the scenes, things have been tense. Ever since the first trial ended in a mistrial, both sides have been scrambling to prepare. Prosecutors switched up their lineup, bringing in new faces hoping to handle things differently this time. But that move might have backfired because the new team wasn't involved in the original investigation, and now they've got less evidence to work with. Melly's lawyers, meanwhile, have grown more confident. They've been waiting for this ruling, knowing it could shift momentum in their favor. They've already said this case has been unfairly drawn out, and this appeal delay just adds to that claim. Their next step will likely be pushing for a faster trial date, arguing that Melly's been sitting in limbo for too long. Fans on social media are dissecting every update, especially after this appellate decision dropped. Some are calling it the turning point in the whole case, saying this could finally give Melly the upper hand. Others are skeptical, warning that the state always finds new ways to fight back. Either way, this legal chess match isn't over, but the board just changed big time. The conversation around this case has never been quiet. With each legal twist, public opinion keeps shifting, and now the internet is divided again. Supporters believe the court's ruling proves the system was overreaching from the start, while critics argue this could make it harder to get justice for the victims. Legal analysts say this appellate decision shows how digital privacy is becoming one of the biggest battles in modern criminal cases. Prosecutors want every piece of online data, but judges are drawing lines, saying, no, you can't just take everything. This ruling could actually influence how other courts handle social media evidence in the future. For now, Melly's team is focused on rebuilding their defense narrative that he's been wrongfully targeted and that investigators went too far. Whether or not you believe him, it's clear this trial is more than just about one rapper. It's about how far the state can go in the digital age. So here's where things stand. YNW Melly just secured one of his biggest courtroom victories yet. The appeals court backed Judge Murphy completely. The evidence scope stays limited, and the state's plan to bring in massive digital data just collapsed. But this isn't the end. This is the setup for what might be one of the most intense retrials in hip-hop history. The prosecution's got to rebuild, the defense is feeling confident, and the fans are waiting to see how it all plays out. Every hearing from here on out is going to matter. Every witness, every file, every decision. The smallest detail could swing the case one way or another. And no matter what side you're on, you can't deny this moment just changed the whole story. The legal fight isn't over, but this chapter, Melly definitely came out on top. During the first trial, the state showed a bunch of messages from Melly's old emails and social media, including conversations with people they claimed were connected to certain groups. But after this new ruling, none of that can be shown again. Those emails and messages that were sent weeks before and after the incident, they're officially off limits now. That also means a lot of his Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook messages with random people won't be part of the new trial either. The court said those conversations went too far beyond the time frame that actually mattered, so they're out. However, the prosecution still has a few key pieces they can use, like the phone tracking data, the ballistics report, and the blood pattern analysis from the car. Investigators claim the evidence showed someone was sitting in one of the seats during the shooting based on where the blood didn't appear. That part will still come up in court. But overall, this is a major win for Melly's defense team. The amount of evidence the state can use just got cut down big time, making their job way harder going forward. The focus now shifts to whether what's left is enough to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So yeah, this case just changed again in a big way. Make sure you subscribe, like, share, and drop a comment below if you want me to keep breaking down what happens next, because this story is far from over.